Okay, hello everybody. Today we're going to do the second half of 7.1. Yesterday we talked about perfect competitions and we talked about monopolistic competition. And today we are going to talk about oligopoly competition or oligopies, and we're going to talk about monopolies. All right, as far as market structures and different types of markets that are out there. Now, of course, to review, yesterday we talked about, first of all, we talked about perfect competition. Perfect competition would be a situation where people have very similar type of products. In fact, we'll kind of scoot back here real quick so we can review. Okay, so again, we look at our normal deal, our characteristics here. So number of producers, similarity of products, ease of entry to the market, control over prices. Now, of course, we talk about perfect competition. Perfect competition is going to be when there are many sellers and buyers of a certain product, and that the products are extremely similar, are just about the exact same. So our example yesterday, going to a farmer's market and buying apples from one table as opposed to buying apples from a second table. They're the exact same product, and because of the exact same product, because there are a lot of buyers and sellers, supply and demand determine price for those items. Okay, they make sure they if you charge $1 for your apples and your competition is charging 50 cents for your apples, you're not going to sell very many apples. So you've got to regulate your price because of that. So you do not have a whole lot of control over price in a perfect competition. Okay, now for the next one, for a monopolistic competition, of course, as we talked about, these are going to be products that are going to be very similar, but not exactly. Okay, and for example, you might have little differences in the product. They may be perceived differences. They may just be actual differences. I mean, like we talked about yesterday, an In-N-Out burger versus a Whataburger. Okay, at the end of the day, they're pretty much the same. They're a hamburger. They're probably just about the same quality, but some people would perceive one In-N-Out burger as being better or worse than a Whataburger, let's say. So this is going to be your example of your monopolistic competition where you have these perceived or real differences between them. I mean, you could also say McDonald's hamburger compared to a Burger King hamburger. Okay, of course, the Burger King hamburger is going to be a little bit different than a McDonald's hamburger, but at the end of the day, they're the exact same product. Now, going into today's material, we will talk about oligopolies. Now, oligopolies are going to be what we see as far as the major industries in our country right now. Okay, they're mainly oligopolies. Now, monopolies are outlawed. We really don't have monopolies in our country anymore, but oligopolies is really what we have. So we see here, this is a market structure where few very large sellers dominate the industry. Most common type of non-competitive market in the U.S. Now, we can think of like we watched in the movie Tucker, the auto industry. Okay, in America, the auto industry is dominated by General Motors and Ford and Chevy. General Motors and Dodge. Dodge Chrysler. So it would be very difficult to break into these markets. Basically, these companies compete against themselves, and there's really nobody else that can come in and break into the market. Like the example you see here, the cell phone industry. Okay, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint. These are the major providers. Okay, if you decided to go out and try and start your own cell phone company right now or telecommunications company right now, it'd be very difficult to break in and compete with these major players. So, and this kind of shows you, of course, the top four producers usually do about 91% of the market in the cell phone industry. I mean, it'd be very difficult for you to get in. I mean, obviously, there's things like Cricket and stuff like that you could be a part of, but these industries are huge. Again, there's not a lot of ways to wiggle room to get in. I mean, you might think of like the movie industry. Okay, you might think of like all these different production companies. Okay, you and your camcorder would have a very difficult time going out and shooting a movie and getting it out there and getting it produced, and doing it on your own. Okay, as opposed to one of these major movie industries, or again, you see the cell phone industry is a good example. Now, oligopolies use celebrity endorsements. Now, of course, they will do these celebrity endorsements, just like we talked about a little bit with the monopolistic competition, to try to make their product look different than somebody else's. So you associate their product with that celebrity or that athlete or that thing that makes you think that it's better. So, for example, you see like Wheaties and cornflakes here. These things are essentially the same. I mean, they're the exact same product. You pour them in a bowl, they're the exact same thing. They're cereal. But you've got one with Wheaties where you have Steph Curry as being the person kind of endorsing that. And then, of course, your cornflakes, you've got Michael Phelps, who was an Olympic athlete. Now, the thing here is, like it says here, is the celebrities can increase the brand equity, but they need to be careful, okay? So, for example, like Steph Curry, I mean, he goes out and wins an NBA championship, and people are going to be very excited about the product. They're going to want to eat Wheaties. They associate it with Steph Curry. It's all good. Michael Phelps, who is the most successful Olympian in history, has more gold medals than any other Olympian in history. He also, which is a good thing for cornflakes, but there was a time when Michael Phelps was actually caught on video smoking marijuana. So that's not a great image you would have for your company. So sometimes these companies attach themselves to these celebrities and they do something wrong. It could also have a negative effect on their product as well, even though, again, in the end of the day, cornflakes and Michael Phelps have nothing in common. Nothing really, that makes one more than the other. But all of a sudden, this celebrity does something bad, and all of a sudden the demand for that product could go down as a result. Now, again, this is a good idea about the characteristics of the oligopoly. You have few numbers of sellers, okay? Like it says here, shows these telecommunication companies like Samsung, Google, Apple and Microsoft, and you see the real small, it says Nokia right there. Well, it shows that, these few number of sellers are out there. There's really not a whole lot you can go from. You've got to pretty much just go with these guys. That's it. Differentiated products. Okay, now a lot of times, especially when you look at a thing like an Apple or a Google, or let's say even an Amazon, they will not just have one thing. Okay, they will produce many things. So when I say, define Amazon, somebody might say a delivery service, somebody might say Amazon Prime, somebody might, talk about the Amazon trucks. I mean, there's all kind of things. I mean, somebody might say a bookstore. So again, they have their hands in a lot of different things. It's not just one thing when it comes to their products. Difficult entry to the market. Of course, it would be very difficult to enter into one of these markets. You couldn't just start your own Amazon, let's say. Today, it would take a long time to get to where Jeff Bezos has gotten Amazon to. Now, of course, you do have some control over prices. Generally, you will be competing with your next competitor, but usually those competitors will keep those prices pretty regulated and pretty close to being the same. Now, interdependent behavior with each other. Now, similar products, whenever one firm acts, the other firm in the industry may follow. So what we see here is just shows some safety stuff. So again, we see we watched the movie Tucker, where he, his big thing was to push for safety in auto vehicles. He was going to put seatbelts into these cars. That seatbelts had never been in cars before. Well, of course, as it said, we don't put seatbelts in our cars because it makes the cars look unsafe. Well, after he did this and he pushed for seatbelts, well, guess what? All the auto manufacturers decided to put seatbelts in. So generally, if one acts or one does something new, all the rest will follow. I mean, you look at cell phones. Apple was the first one to come up with that, with the smartphone, with the touch screen and no buttons. Well, before you know it, all the other companies started coming out with their own versions of that same product. So they have interdependent behavior of each other. They try new products, but again, they also kind of try to keep up with each other as a result. Now, with this being said, of course, it also has to do with their pricing too. You'll generally see if one company starts to have a sale, or the prices go down on one, or the interest rate goes down on one, the interest rate will go down on the other ones too, because they're trying to compete with each other. Again, they'll copy the competitor's price. Now, how they compete, again, another industry, the airline industry is another great example of this. You're not going to be able to start your own airline. But independent behavior may take the form of collusion instead of competition. Now, the problem is when they do this collusion, sometimes this is seen as being illegal because they might conspire together to get a price up or a price down, and that's not letting the market decide. So it says collusion is a formal agreement to set a specific price or otherwise behave in a cooperative manner, where in essence the companies can work together to kind of get those prices down or where they need to be. But again, a lot of times that's frowned upon because it does not allow the market to set those prices, which we would have in our type of economy. Now, how they compete. Now, of course, you see here one form of collusion is price fixing, or agreeing to charge the same or similar price for a product that are higher than those determined by the supplier demand. Of course, like it says on the bottom, usually restrains trade against and it's against the law. So they don't normally allow this to happen, these price fixing. And if they are found doing this price fixing, they get major fines and, of course, a lot of bad publicity. Okay, now of course, oligopolistic firms are like cats in a bag, compete hard, drive down the cost, lead to less profits, but they also could collude with each other effectively, act like a monopoly, and control prices. Okay, so they could either be fighting or they could be docile, that you see there. Now, moving on, we're going to go to monopolies. Okay, now monopolies, again, y'all might be familiar with the board game Monopoly. This is going to be when a market is structured with only one seller of a particular product. So again, it's the opposite of the opposite of pure competition is monopoly. So there's no competition. You don't have anybody else having this similar product. They set the prices, the whole thing. Now on this, Adam Smith. Of course, you see here Adam Smith's laissez-faire philosophy that government should not interfere with businesses. Many attempts to outlaw them has not eliminated all monopolies. So in our country, we have outlawed monopolies. Now, some companies kind of get around that. They kind of make their own laws rules when it comes to that, where they kind of skate around what the government has said. But for the most part, monopolies are outlawed. Okay. Now, the type of monopolies that are out there. Now some of these monopolies are done without really a control of the company. Okay, so for example, a natural monopoly, a geographic monopoly, a technological monopoly, and a government monopoly. So on these, first, natural monopoly. So you see here is the quality demanded in a market is one large enough for a single firm to operate. Okay, so if it could produce if all of a sudden a firm can produce a product cheaper than anybody else can, and it's not profitable for any of these other companies to produce that product because this other company has an inside track. Let's say, they buy a mine that has a certain type of material in it, a mineral in it that you really can't find anywhere else. Well, if they own that mine and they're the only ones that can produce that product, they own a natural monopoly. So nobody else can make that product even if they tried because they don't have that material. So that would be an example of that. Next, natural competition. Inconvenient and impractical in these situations. Okay, again, if you're the only one that can make that material or produce that material, nobody else can do that. It's not practical. Okay. Now another one, an example could also be like electricity providers. Okay, in a country, in a society. I mean, you don't really want competing electric companies. Okay, you don't want one driving down the price or driving up the price. You want it to be regulated, especially when you talk about utilities. The water company, for example. You want to make sure those products, electricity and water, are supplied to people, and that these companies aren't worrying about competing with somebody else, that they're just kind of put a quality product out. Next, geographic monopoly. Now, geographic monopoly is a monopoly based on the absence of other sellers in certain geographic areas. So a good example of this is if anybody's ever driven out to El Paso. Okay, once you leave San Antonio, you pass Bernie, you pass Kerrville, you pass Junction, and once you pass Junction, there's like literally nothing until you get to El Paso, and it's like past Junction, that's like 8 hours till you get to El Paso. Well, out in the middle of nowhere, 8 hours down the road, there are these gas stations that are out there. And usually these gas stations are pretty big truck stops that have like showers and restaurants and maybe like a place for these truckers to stop and sleep and things like that. But, because there's not a huge population, there's not a lot of people are going to go out there and just start their own truck stop. Now there are some out there, but those truck stops have a geographic monopoly because it's not practical for, let's say, a Walmart to go put up a Walmart supercenter out in an area that maybe has 100 people that live in there, that live in that area, and traffic just kind of flows through. So that gives that truck stop a geographic monopoly. Now, a lot of times, if you've ever been into one of these truck stops out in the middle of nowhere, the products in there are usually higher priced. They have like DVDs in there. Well, a DVD might cost you anywhere from $15 to $20 at Walmart. Well, in these truck stops, those DVDs will cost you $30 to $40. So they do have control over price because it's like, where else are you going to go? So that is an example of a geographic monopoly. Next is a technological monopoly. Now, this is one based on ownership of or control of a manufacturing method, process, or scientific method. Now, in this, and we've watched several episodes of Shark Tank, and they've asked if they've gotten a patent. Okay, well, that's basically like it says here, an exclusive right to manufacture, use, or sell any new or useful invention for a specific period to the inventor. So if you invent a product or you come up with a process or an idea and you are granted a patent, you are the only person that can produce and use that product or use that method for a certain amount of time. We'll talk about that amount of time in just a minute. This is because you get what's called an intellectual property. Okay, you created this thing, therefore you're the one that's going to be allowed to make it, not somebody else come in and steal your idea. Okay, so this is kind of where we see this. Now, of course, you can see here like a submarine, for example, the technology, sonar, the shooting off the nuclear weapons. I mean, these are things that they have patents to. Certain companies make them, not just everybody can make them, and it's an exclusive contract to those people. Now, on this, again, as you can see here, inventions are covered for 20 years, okay? After that, they become public property available for the benefit of all. So what happens is if this guy, like right here, this dude right here, he created Super Soakers, okay? Well, the Hasbro attempted to make their own version of Super Soaker, but he had a copyright. He had a patent on it. And you can see here, he was awarded $73 million from Hasbro because they were using his product that he had a patent on, okay? So you have that exclusive right. Now, like it says here, it's covered for 20 years. But a lot of times what will happen is that every so often, every 5 years, 10 years down the road, or even every other year, you make an improvement to your product that you then get a patent on, and it pushes out that patent another 20 years from that point. So they kind of keep that patent for that long when they keep improving on that product. Now, copyright also has something to do with that. So again, when we talk about intellectual property, this may not be something you can physically say that's mine, but you look at like J.K. Rowling, who created Harry Potter. She has the intellectual property of that, or owns the intellectual property of that story. So she can determine who uses those characters, in their stories, or if anybody can write another type of Harry Potter book, or video games, or movies, or whatever. Now, art and literary works are protected through a copyright, the exclusive right of authors or artists to publish, sell, or reproduce their work for their lifetime plus 70 years. Okay, so they keep this for a long time. Like it says, their lifetime plus 70 years, which means their relatives, their family has the exclusive rights to those products as well. I know the big thing on copyright, and it has to do with like music. I mean, for example, like the Beatles. The Beatles for a long time, I mean, back when they were producing their music in the 60s and in the early 70s, they didn't understand the whole idea about copyright. So their music, which is some of the most famous music in the world, was just kind of out there. Well, along came a dude named Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson actually bought up the copyrights to all these songs that the Beatles had produced. And so even though the Beatles had created them, they never copyrighted them. Michael Jackson is the one that came in and actually bought up a lot of the Beatle music. So, again, what this does is it encourages people to be original and make up new things instead of just copying old things. And again, if you do that, you owe some money to these people, to the people that came up with the products. It's kind of like if you could think of the idea of like plagiarism, where you can't just go in and write out what somebody else said. You have to cite them and give them credit and the whole deal. Same concept. Okay. Next, government monopoly, like we talked about kind of with the water system with the natural monopoly earlier. This is owned and operated by the government. In most cases, involve products or services that private industry cannot adequately supply. Many towns and cities have monopolies that oversee water use. Okay, so that's pretty self-explanatory. And I believe we are done. Okay, guys, that is all for chapter 7.1. I will put out 7.2 tomorrow. All right.